My name is Amy Starczewski. I direct the Oral History Master of Arts program here at Columbia, and tonight's event is part of our year-long series on oral history and storytelling. This is our 8th event in the series. And so in this series, we're really thinking about what the relationship is between oral history and storytelling. Are they the same thing? Is oral history a method of listening that allows us to hear experiences that can't be contained in stories? What do we mean by a story? What's the relationship between oral history and indigenous oral history and storytelling practices? And so I'm really excited to have Rachel Falcone with us this evening because she has such a depth of experience in multiple modes and genres of taking really deep oral history interviews with people, finding the story in them, oftentimes through collaborative practices, and then amplifying those stories in ways particularly that are politically effective. And that's really hard to do, right? To make political stories that are compelling, to condense and refine people's stories in a way that's respectful and collaborative. And so I'm really excited to learn from her this evening. I want to start also, since a lot of this work in particular is about land and the right to land, by acknowledging that here at Columbia University, we are working on the unceded land of the Lenape people who were violently dispossessed from this place, from this hill that we're sitting on here. We honor their roots here and the strength it's taken to resist and rebuild both here and elsewhere. As oral historians, we also feel it's important to particularly acknowledge the roots of our practice in indigenous oral history practices, and the ways in which our field has historically excluded indigenous people and indigenous oral history practices. This acknowledgement is really only the beginning of a long process of thinking about what it means and what it looks like to build honoring indigenous land, people, and knowledge into our practices as oral historians for the purposes of healing, reconciliation, learning, resurgence, and the pursuit of justice. So please take a minute to just think about that. And I'll introduce Rachel a little bit more fully. So Rachel Falcone is a documentary filmmaker and multimedia artist. She's the co-founder and executive director of Storyline, an organization that builds power with story and strategy. As part of that work, they create film, photography, audio, theater, installation, and emerging forms. They specialize particularly, as I said before, in creating participatory documentaries through an inclusive and collaborative process that engages communities in designing and carrying out the collection and dissemination of their own story. And all those of us who have ever tried to do that work, like, that is such demanding and hard and long haul work, so props to you for finding a way to do that over time. In addition to producing the short film and exhibition Water Warriors, about a community fighting to protect their water, recent projects Rachel's co-directed include the participatory web documentary and exhibition Sandy Storyline about Hurricane Sandy, which was Tribeca Film Festival's inaugural Storyscapes Award winner in 2013. Sanctuary, a theater commission from the Working Theater about the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, right around the corner from us here. And 28th Amendment, Housing is a Human Right, a multimedia project about the 2008 housing crisis. And I realized in thinking back this evening that I think that's when we met, actually, was in doing work with Picture the Homeless around the housing crisis. I was working with old school squatters to revise their how to squat a building zines from the 80s and try to reissue them in the 2008 context. And we came together through that work. Rachel has produced content with the award-winning National Oral History Project StoryCorps and Earsay, and was an associate producer on Insight Pictures' Young Lakota. She's directed dozens of short films for organizations like AFSCME and the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. And she's also a sound recordist for film and radio, including most recently Knock Down the House on Netflix and a forthcoming podcast from the Weather Channel. As a big weather checking fan, so I'll mention that tonight's event is part of the Paula Lazarus lecture series, and we're grateful for that support. I'm going to pass around a sign-in sheet if you're not on our mailing list and you would like to be. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rachel and welcome all of you.
Thank you all for being here. I might sit just because I have a lot of slides and I want people to be able to see. Is that okay? Can people hear me? And yeah? Okay. So just let me know. I sometimes go into a soft, meek voice. So just tell me if you can't hear me. So thank you for that lovely introduction, and just in all gratitude for spending the time to hear about my work and some of the approach that we take to storytelling. So I'm part of a company called Storyline, and we build power with story and strategy. So we make independent documentaries, strategic campaigns, art and multimedia, basically about some of the biggest issues of our time. And I wanted to share just like a couple pictures of some of the work and where the work has been, just to kind of give you a sense of the kinds of places that we think about when, at least for my practice, it's just always been how do we get stories into community in creative spaces that they might be unexpected, and how do we help people encounter art in ways that are unexpected. So this is like my first exhibit ever in 2009 in a laundromat, and it's supported by the Laundromat Project, which some of you may know is like an amazing arts organization in New York. So we hung the photographs above the washers and had oral histories playing out loud. We've taken over vacant storefronts in Philadelphia, and we've used like temporary moving and storage units in Florida to fill with art, just like wherever we could plop down and be. Libraries are some of the coolest places to put art, just because people are coming from a book and then they get to encounter your oral histories. This is in the Mid-Manhattan branch, where we had some of our Sandy projects and a little booth where people could see and contribute photos. We're also at film festivals. That's been a place to share some of the interactive projects, as well as museums and galleries. This is Project Row Houses, which is an awesome venue in Texas. And places like Mokata in Brooklyn, and New Space in Washington. So, you know, like sometimes we're in a more traditional space. This is St. John the Divine. I'm going to share some stories from that project later, but that's been a really interesting process. How do you share oral histories in a cathedral space, right? And so like one of our things that we were hacking was headphones for audience members, just because sound was completely drowned out. And so we wanted to be able to play oral histories and have people feel the intimacy of those oral histories, but in this vast cathedral space, right? So how do we do that? So I started, some of you may recognize this, some of you may not. It's a cassette player. I don't know quite what brand I had as a kid, but I had something like this next to my bed. And in my memory, my mom was like, you didn't really listen to that many tapes, but in my memory, I listened to a lot of kind of like children's stories when I was growing up, and they would kind of like lull me to sleep. And my mom used to, she said that she like used to record some books that weren't on audio tape, just so that I could then hear her voice. So that was like a big thing for me, just like voice kind of from an early age was really, really important. I shared with some of the students earlier that I then had the privilege of getting a job with StoryCorps, which some of you may know is the NPR show. They have an NPR show and it's an oral history project that records stories all over the country. And so I kind of was trained in radio and production through that work with StoryCorps. And so like what I wanted to talk about tonight is kind of stories and how they've been a big driver in my work. I think I'm very heavily influenced by StoryCorps and my work with them, in that I've always kind of been driven by what is compelling and what is, how we can kind of create and share stories and gather stories that will lift up the issues that matter, and how do we get them out in the world. And so what I want to talk about tonight is just kind of what stories are, why we tell them, how we find them, and kind of a little bit about trying to pull the curtain on like how we think about crafting them. And I think it's a really subjective thing, so I'm kind of excited to share a little bit just of how we think about it. So I wanted to start by just playing a story, and I misspelled Joseph's last name, Joseph Ferdinand. So he is, well, you'll hear from him. I met him through my work with Bronx Clergy Coalition. So this is Joseph.
Housing is a right. Housing is a right. Housing is a right.
Housing is a right.
Housing is a right. Housing is a right.
Everyone is entitled to it.
Housing is a right.
Housing is a right.
Housing is a right.
Affordable housing is a right.
Housing is a fundamental human right.
Housing is a right. it's an essential part of life. So I do think it's a human right. But not only do I think it's a human right, but most of the world does. If you look at international covenants and instruments, it says that housing is a human right.
You know, when you say housing is a human right, it says that every individual on this earth has a right to a safe abode, a place to call home, a place to put their head down at night.
A human right means everyone is entitled to it.
My name is Joseph Friedman. I lived in Queens, but after an 18-year marriage, things wasn't working out. That's how I moved to the Bronx, basically. When I moved here, I moved like in the wintertime, so it was quiet, and I thought it was, all right, this, it's quiet and nice, I could live here. I'm used to living like suburban type of living, the home, space, not many people, not very close, But when the weather started to break here in the Bronx and, people started coming out, I was like, wow, man, what the hell am I doing here? Because to be honest with you, even though I grew up poor and everything, I never really lived in the ghetto. And this is the ghetto. And I didn't think that this was where I belong, I would very rarely come out of my house unless I really had to. And if I did come out, it'd be like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning time. I would jump on my bike and ride, listen to my music and whatnot. I just didn't want to be around people. There was talk about they forming a tenant association. And people used to be ringing my bell, come on down, we having a meeting, come on down. I'd be like to myself, what the hell are they bothering me for? I don't really care. And then one day I was out and I was coming in the building and there was a meeting going on right in the lobby and I couldn't walk back out. I was like a deer caught in the headlights. I was just there. And some of the problems they started talking about, like criminal activity, drug activity that they're living with on a daily basis in the building that I live in. I remember this one particular woman talking about how she was so scared because they'd be on her fire escape. She's a single parent with like 3 kids. She said, I can't even sleep. I have to sleep with one eye closed, one eye open. Just because I'm scared that they're gonna bust through my window at some point and do something to me and my family. And you call for the police and they says, all right, they will send someone. No one ever shows up. These are people on drugs. There's a lady talk about these people having sexual intercourse on the staircase, and she came up and they didn't even stop. That type of thing, really disgusting. That kind of like impacted me a little bit. But I think when I looked around and I saw the children who are being subjected to this, and some of the people had their kids right there with them too, and so I felt it was my duty to do what is required of me as an adult, as a human being, as a man. And so I started going to the meetings and voicing my opinions and suggestions and stuff like that. I was telling people, look, y'all gotta organize, you gotta speak with one voice, and be on the same page, just don't sit there and make phone calls, go to the precinct. Go to the precinct, go in numbers, put the pressure on them, have them do something. And they used to listen. And when I look back, it's because I'm not the kind of person you would find in the spotlight. No way, no how. I'm very shy. But it was just something that I felt that people should do. And they kind of like put me to the forefront. And I couldn't even tell you it because it happened so slick and so quick, that I found myself running this tenant association, basically. So the building today, my building, the cleanest. No criminal activity, no, your neighbors, my neighbors know me. As a matter of fact, people calling me by my names. I hear people on the street calling me by my name, and I don't even know these people. And you want to hear something funny? I went to Queens about 6 months ago, and when I went to Queens, I wanted to get the hell out of there and get back to the Bronx. That's how I felt. Like, I don't want to be here. I want to come back home.
So that's Joseph. So I kind of wanted to talk about what are the elements that make this story. Can someone jump in? Yeah.
It had a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Had a beginning, middle, and end. Great. What else?
It had character development.
Okay.
Change. He changed.
He changed. Okay, so you saw like a transformation in Joseph. What did you learn about Joseph?
He was shy at first.
Right. Was he a hero?
Yeah.
Or why was he a hero?
Because he stepped outside his comfort zone, because he really felt for the children and families and people that he saw as less vulnerable than himself, perhaps. And so he took on roles that he wouldn't have imagined for himself before seeing that.
What details stuck out to y'all?
Like when he walks into the building and there's a meeting going on, and like seeing that, I could just like see that in my brain, and so I think that that was a very visual like element that stuck out.
Anything else?
When he says like when the weather broke and everyone started coming outside. I was like, oh yeah, I know that moment in New York.
So some of the things that we think about, like, you know, this is like, I played Joseph's story partly because like when you, in retrospect, it's kind of like a classic hero journey where, you know, like I was just curious why he started organizing, right? It's like, when you meet someone and they're an amazing organizer, how did you get there? And so it kind of, you know, it was like a 3-hour interview in which we talked about this journey, but there were so many moments that were just so vivid, right? And what's interesting to me, or what you know drew me, was that Joseph was like reluctant, right? Like he didn't really want to end up doing this, but that he was changed by this moment, right? This moment of conflict when he had to like make that change. And so for me, often like, you know, when you have the privilege of talking to people, it's the curiosity around how did they get where they are, and just where was that spark, where was that change, which, you know, sometimes people have a really clear vision of like, okay, I got from A to B, but sometimes nobody's asked them how they got there. And so to be able to allow someone the space to just reflect on that transformation, for me is like really, really compelling. I'm also curious, what did you learn about Joseph that's like unsaid, or about the situation, like about New York too?
Yeah, like the different areas of New York are very different. Like he talks about going to Queens and then just wanting to go back. Like, so that, and also when he moves down, like when he originally moves, not feeling comfortable there. So like,
Yeah.
It sounds like after his marriage broke up, he had been living in a house, because he said he was used to a suburban lifestyle, and then he moved to the hood, and that building sounds like it was in really bad shape. So economically, he probably had, you know, probably was less well off as a result of the divorce, which happens often to people.
Right. Anything else that comes to mind about this moment in New York? I guess I'm curious, like, what do you learn about the police or neighbors?
They wouldn't do anything. The police.
The police weren't doing anything, right? I don't know, it was something that I could relate to. I mean, in some ways it's like, I feel mixed about having just like a hero story about like, you know, them finally, but he knocked on their door and got them to do something, right? But at that moment, he was finding that they weren't doing anything. So that was like an interesting narrative for me that I thought I wanted to be in there. Yeah. I'd say what was interesting to me was just about the power of individual people to turn something around, right? And so, although this is like a tiny slice, right, it's a very condensed story about how he started organizing, and I'm sure there's lots of people involved and there's lots of other elements. It's like a way to like represent a little bit of him and talk about some of the social justice issues, right? And like the power, for me, I've like played this story for 12 years because I think often I like to use it in circumstances where I want to try to encourage people that they can organize or do something. We have a project called Water Warriors, which is about an indigenous community and a fight to protect their water that I'm not going to share a lot tonight about, but it's just, for me, I've always been drawn to stories that are kind of about everyday people stepping up and what the power of citizen action is. So that's like what drew me to that story and the power to share it. What's interesting also is the idea that how multiple stories can create this kind of like narrative. You start with even Joseph's story, which is like a tiny slice, and then you add all these other stories, which, you know, for me, so this was part of a larger project called Housing is a Human Right. And we, you know, like started the project, you know, I've talked to folks about funding. It's like it was a little hard to fund a project called Housing is a Human Right. But we just felt like our politics and values should be kind of like at the top of the project, right? And so the project was really like a collection of stories about people that were interested in the dignity of home and either like dealing with a situation that was threatening or they were fighting back. And so together we were able to kind of hit on different nuances. I mean, Joseph's story just hit on a handful, but I'll play a couple more, and the idea is that you're able to kind of, that we were able to talk about some of the complexity that we were seeing in the housing movement and the people that were fighting, but also just the situation. So like living in Brooklyn, you had tenants that were dealing with issues, you had a lot of homeowners in foreclosure around 2008, 2009, particularly in African American communities. So how do we tell like a whole variety of stories as part of a project that then can touch on all the nuances of it? And it's always like something that I've wrestled with is like how do you you know, take these huge big stories, right? So I'm going to play a very short clip of a project that we're still working on that developed called Sandy's Storyline about Hurricane Sandy, and just like take something as large as this like massive storm that hit New York and kind of touch on the different voices that were impacted. So I'm going to play a very short kind of trailer of a piece that we're still working on, and the new iteration of it's called Sea Change.
I'd walk on the boardwalk and play the skeet ball and buy ice cream. It was a very good part of our lives, being near the ocean.
Everything was so nice, and then the storm came and just flipped everything upside down. It was something like out of the movies.
I'm still living in the same place where I thought I could die or my kids could die, but I'm home, and I kind of didn't want to be here because I can try to detach myself as much as possible, but if another storm comes and I'm in it again, that detachment dissolves and I'm in it again.
Trailer to get the idea, but for us it's the connection, right, between all these different narratives. And so the idea is that the eventual project has a lot of different voices of different people that have been impacted, but may feel some of the same things, right? May feel like fear about what happened, what's gonna happen in the future, may feel like a very strong love of the place, right? And like what living by the water means. My family lives like a block from the ocean in New Jersey, and it's always been really important to me. So that's been a really important through line, is how how to kind of continue to convey like how important these places and neighborhoods are to people that were impacted by the storm. So, so I want to play a couple more stories from the housing project and kind of talk about, but I want you to kind of like, I'm going to skip a little quickly, but well, here's a cute picture of me, because I think that everybody has a story to tell. So, but like, why do we tell stories? So there's two questions I'm not going to ask out loud, but I kind of want you to reflect on them because they're kind of guiding questions in terms of thinking about. So, what are some of the stories you tell often to others, or others have told you often? Right? There's like the stories that maybe we grew up with our parents telling us, or the things that we repeat. And just to think about, why are these stories repeated, right? So just like questions I want to kind of throw out into the ether as part of the talk. And then there's this, what are stories do you and others share less frequently, right? There's like often the things that we're like uncomfortable sharing, and why you don't maybe share those like on repeat at parties, right? And you know, it's interesting, like sometimes some of the most challenging stories are the most compelling, right? But they're also really hard, and they're the vulnerable stories, and we're asking people to share them. But, you know, so it's always like a process of like, you know, just what's the aim, right, in terms of what we're sharing. And sometimes we get a little bit of both. Sometimes the stories that we tell over and over are really compelling. You know, those are the things that are performed, and they're maybe part of a culture, right, that needs to be shared. So I want to play a story from Rob Robinson, and yeah, so I'll just let Rob share his story.
I'm Rob Robinson. I'm 52 years of age, and I've worked with an organization called Automatic Data Processing, ADP, the payroll company. I received an offer to move to a new division of ADP, which was an employee leasing organization that was purchased by ADP from Miami with its headquarters in Miami. So I was a vice president from the Long Island region, became the general manager of this new division, and it's a tremendous opportunity. So I picked up my life, moved to Miami, and that was in March of 2001. In July of 2001, I was told by the ownership that was moving out that there was no more money in the budget for my position, and I was laid off from that position at ADP. So having picked up my life in a short period of time and moved to Miami, I decided to give Miami a chance. And I was receiving unemployment. I received a little severance package, which I paid off my lease. I had a 2-year lease when I moved down there. And you know, I was surviving for about a year and a half with unemployment. That ran out, started using money in the bank. And before you know it, I used my 401k. And you know, I finally had to move out. I had gotten an eviction notice, and when I first lost my housing, I was sleeping in the car for a while. So I figured, you know, even with that challenge, I would eventually find work. I had talent, had skills, and I would eventually find work. I never really believed that I would end up homeless. The reality of it was, it shook me, and you know, it still didn't settle in until I got hungry. You know, you couldn't even, like in New York, you can find places to get something to eat when you're hungry. And you couldn't. So I'd gone about 4 days in Miami hungry. And I'm starting to like feel dizzy, and I'm like, holy cow, I got to do something about this. And I sat down and I said, I'm going to sit in the shopping center. Almost as soon as I sat down that bucket, this elderly couple, as I first took a seat, walked by me, and I guess they saw in my eyes that I wasn't feeling right or I was sick. And they said to me in Spanish, tu hambre, which means, are you hungry? And I said yes, and they'd just come out of a restaurant, they had a meal to go, and they gave it to me and walked away. They said, here, God bless you, and walked away. Like, they read my eyes. I mean, I was so hungry, I was dizzy. I was really feeling sick, you know, and that's when the reality set in. I'm like, okay, what am I gonna do about this? Miami has no support infrastructure for homelessness. There are like 2 shelters in the entire city of Miami, and basically, if you're a single adult, they just don't help you. They say there's nothing for you, especially if you're a single adult with no dependents. Then you're basically out of luck. So during that time period, I slept for about 2 years on Miami Beach. I basically slept on the beach at night while I panhandled in the shopping center during the day to basically eat and to move around. The biggest problem for me was having something to do during the day. And I have to have a routine. I know it sounds weird, but you know, you get up a certain time and you do certain things. I made sure I was always used to getting up 4 o'clock in the morning. I still got up 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm not used to not having a shower, so I'm not gonna let homelessness keep me from not having a shower. So I made it a point to go, you know those little showers where you stand and you wipe your feet? I was out there every morning, 4 o'clock, stark naked, you know, washing myself. And I'll never forget, the first couple of times I was out there, cop rolled up, he looked at me, you know, and strange, and I guess he saw I wasn't doing anything perverted, I'm just, the guy's trying to clean himself, you know, I can't mess with that. That became my routine, and I get on the bus, go to the shopping center, and sat there from 10 to 8. That was my job, Monday through, actually 7 days a week. I worked 7 days a week panhandling. It wasn't an easy thing for me to do. I used to sit in the shopping center with a little cup, and people would walk by me and say, well, I don't know what you want. You got to shake it or something, you know, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. It was the hardest thing in the world for me to do. And after a while, people who were like regulars in the shopping center knew me. They'd give me $1 or $2. There were people that would come by after knowing me for a while and talking to me, would bring me meals and whatnot. So, you know, I didn't get a chance a lot of times to be lonely during the day. But sometimes at night, you know, you miss family and friends. I refused to let, most of my father's side of family is from Fort Lauderdale. I never went up to Fort Lauderdale, never called Fort Lauderdale once to tell them I'm in trouble, because I've always had a reputation within the family, being a strong individual. You know, he worked at a young age, being like the first, and, you know, my dad was one of 14, and being the first of anyone's children to go through college, get a college degree. So people always looked at me at this certain level, and it was kind of hard for me to let them see me at a level less than what they expected, you know. At times it was scary, not knowing. When folks would tell me that I was here 10 years, 16 years, I just heard too many of those stories. There was one guy they called Arkansas, he's from Arkansas, and he was sitting behind the library one day, which was on the beach, and he actually, like, died sitting there. And that kind of freaked me out too. Like, I can't go out like this. The guy just, like, probably thought himself to death. You know, how am I going to get out of this? And I was lucky enough to pull myself out, but there are a whole lot of folks that just don't have that strength, wherewithal, or knowledge to do it. I've always compared homelessness to, if you remember as a kid, like, I grew up on Long Island, so a lot of times, you know, there were insects and one in a big backyard. But you see these drains, like sometimes in the sink, and we used to have, sometimes in my kitchen, my mom would have problems with the ants coming into the house, and she'd call you to get rid of them. And as a kid, you know, you push the ant in the sink and turn the water on, and you watch the ant struggle to get out of this water, you know, it's swirling down the drain. I always said homelessness was like that. You know, here comes the water on you, and eventually you're gonna go down the drain unless something or somebody pulls you out.
I guess I'm curious, does that bring up anything for you, like juxtaposed with the other story, right? Like I'm starting to share the collection, right, of stories. Does it bring up? It's totally fine if it doesn't. I'm just curious in terms of thinking about housing or just.
Well, they both moved.
Like in a narrative arc. Yeah.
Well, no, I literally.
Oh, they both.
The stories started with moving.
With displacement, right?
Right.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Similar to that, they're both kind of from this outsidery perspective in a new environment, kind of where we would be listening to the story, just on the precipice of watching these events unfold.
Right. Right. So they're being narrated to us, right? And so I share Rob's story, and we have the privilege of having Rob here. But because Rob's like an amazing speaker, right? He's a talker. He's the kind of storyteller that you just like want to sit with for hours. This is Rob speaking at a town hall meeting for the special rapporteur. So there's the people that you meet, like, you know, maybe in your job, maybe on the subway, maybe they're part of your family, maybe they're your friends that just like can tell amazing stories, right? And so Rob is telling something very personal, but he's also just like an amazing storyteller in general in life, right? This is him speaking at an event for Picture the Homeless. This is him negotiating with the cops. And like, you know, he's just like, he's someone that's very vocal, right? And then, you know, so I guess I wanted to share his story because, you know, Rob laid out a bunch of things. It kind of like, you know, pieces of his story, and this is just a small slice, right, of an early part of his story, but came out through questions. But you know, sometimes you meet people that maybe have like absolutely never told their story, or they're shyer, or that's different. And so I want to play. I'm not going to play the whole story, but I'm just going to play a short clip of a a couple that we met in Brooklyn that we interviewed together.
I am here for 20 years, and I'm 72 years, 72 years old, and this is my husband, 47 years to the same husband.
This lady here is my wife. I've been married to her for 47 years. I'm 73 years of age.
When I first moved in, I paid $700 a month, and we were living upstairs. So we had two big bedrooms,
Bedroom on the third floor.
and one
Only
small
bedroom, we have no bathroom.
bedroom, like 2.5. It used to hold 2 living rooms set, and over there was the big kitchen. But as the house was sold, the landlord told me, he's a new landlord, he asked us to move because he wanted to repair the place, just transfer from one floor to the next. I thought he was talking the truth, so I tried to help. Move up things, move down things. The bed was brought down, and when we were down here, maybe 2 months, called me on the phone, I want one of the rooms. I said, which room? Upstairs. His friend got in fire and he had nowhere to stay. I said, take one from your place. He said, I don't have no space here, all over full. I said, you have so many tenants? He said, oh yes, all over full. And when your buddy is in trouble, you have to help them. I said, but you're not helping me. You told me just a few things we had to move down here. And I have things upstairs. The living room had things. Something tell me, go upstairs because you still have your things up there. I say, well, go upstairs and see what's going on. You don't know what you can do up there. When I went, everything, bedroom, everything. Living room, everything, back in the kitchen, everything. It just tumbled down, and it gave me the greatest shock.
Everything was back in the kitchen.
Not even shock, but like collapsing, fear, angry.
Because if they move all of stuff from the living room and put back it in the kitchen, things was from the floor nearly reaching the roof.
Hey, calm down, don't say no more, your pressure will go up. Yes, it was a mess. He just moved them across and take what he wanted for himself, that landlord. He put some in the basement and he put the rest in the kitchen, and some he must, I don't know, he threw away some got broken, and then he put them anyhow he liked putting them. Because
he threw away the couch.
To keep me occupied. You understand what I mean? That he could plan how to rent his place.
The landlord wants us to go for him to renovate here and rent it out in rooms as he's doing upstairs and make more money than what he will get from us for the month.
So the story continues a little bit, but I just wanted you to get, so does that raise any questions of like, you know, is there anything different in that story or something that resonated for you from that voice?
Well, it's just a very different version of troubles that people have with their housing. It's not like they were evicted, they were cheated and misrepresented and lied to.
Yeah, right. It's another like, yeah, okay.
For me, I mean, I wouldn't say this about the other one, but it just brings out the historical analysis of African Americans and women, people of color, in terms of housing. You know, also the redlining where people live, and you know, it was interesting. The other guy, when he talked about his pride and being the first one to go to college, it has a lot to do with the historical analysis about migrational patterns between African Americans and also systemic discrimination in housing as well. Because, you know, compared to the older couple who had to move but didn't really say much, and compared to the younger gentleman, just looking at how things really haven't changed, in my opinion. So no, they weren't being evicted, but still there was an upheaval within their household. And for seniors, that could be problematic as well. And for the gentleman, also looking at African American homelessness is higher than any other group. So, I mean, for me, that's what I brought up.
Yeah. It's a really different tone, too. Like, there's this tone of, like, outrage and this kind of, like, momentum of telling the story, whereas Rob's like kind of more matter of fact about it, like, and like there's a calm, like or like a containment in the way that you tell the story. Is they're like more like it's more raw maybe.
Yeah, so like this is their living room that we're interviewing them in, right? Or not their living room, their kitchen, I mean. So like, well, I mean, I guess it's like, they're just different, right? It's like, so like when we interviewed them, we had a mic. I'm like not showing a picture of them because they had wanted to remain anonymous. That's why I'm not sharing their names, but like we had a mic on each of them, right? And some of storytelling is like being prepared, right? Like if we'd only come with one mic, I think we would have gotten a different story. But like, for me, the story is as much about like all the issues that they're dealing with as much as like who they are as a couple, right? Like you get a sense of them, which is just a different thing when you get to interview 2 people or 3 people or a community of people together, right? Like it's a different experience. And so for me, like there was so much like love between them that we were trying to capture, but also just like the challenges that they were like totally in it and what the landlord had done to them in terms of like ripping out all their cupboards and these, you know, LA folks who had like nice china and like just like the things that you get when you're older and like just everything that they were dealing with. And we knew like their story represented so many people that are under the radar. We had met them through Pratt Area Community Council, and they had just come to a meeting to try to get help. You know, the challenging thing is like they were actually living in place that was like totally uninhabitable, right? So like the floor was about to collapse into the basement. There was like a sewage line that the landlord had cut like from one of the bathrooms that was like dripping raw sewage into the apartment. So, and their power had just been cut when we were interviewing them. So like they had all their like fridge was like, they couldn't open the fridge because it had been like no power for like 3 days with all the stuff that they had, you know, like all their food. So just like, yeah, like what does that mean to interview someone in that moment? It's just like, it's a different thing, right? And so sometimes you're doing a documentary or even an oral history that's like, may not be as formal as like a sit down reflection on something that maybe someone's gone through and maybe has a little time and distance with, right? It's just a different thing. So yeah, I just wanted to share their story just as like another, like how we tell stories about. But the goal is to kind of be able to juxtapose, and like what you shared is so powerful and means a lot to me in terms of like what you can try to convey about the systemic issues and how they're affecting communities. Right?
Also, one more thing I meant to say is, depending who the interviewer is or the interviewee, there's a different kind of stories. If you think about the WPA narratives, when they were interviewing former enslaved Africans and about their experience, they kept a lot inside of themselves because they were mostly white folks who were interviewing them in a sense. So they're older, so there might be a lot more resistance to telling everything because of that historical space that's there than with Rob Robinson, in a sense. Because he grew up in a time when you had the freedom and privilege to speak and say everything else.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, so much of I was sharing with the students earlier. It's like it's important to know who you are, right, and like what you bring, and the limitations and the benefits of who you are and who you're talking to. So if you're trying to ask someone to share their story, they may or may not want to open up, or they may share something completely different than if you're someone else. And so we've been privileged to share the stories that we do capture, but it may be different than if a different interviewer went, right? So yeah, this was their living room. So these are like the things that I do, or try to tell myself to do when I'm thinking about storytelling, which is like getting, you know, as many details as possible. Not everyone thinks like in terms of details, but that's like, I'm always just curious, like, tell me more about the thing that you're talking about, and to ask about specific moments. So sometimes folks will just like pour out with something. So I'm going to share an example of a woman, Marcia, that like sometimes would just launch into a story, and she would go to something specific, but sometimes I would ask her about something very specific. Like always sticking with the good stuff and just like what someone's talking about. And the good stuff is like what they're talking about that they're excited about. It's not necessarily what you want to talk about. So like, for me, I was kind of taught to like, if I drop my notebook and stop taking notes and leaning in a little bit, then that's like the best moment, because I'm like lost in what they're sharing and they're excited. and they have like a sparkle in their eye, right? So like, you know, you can often see in an interview when you're trying to talk to someone, it's like if they kind of like close up and clam up, there's a reason. Maybe you ask something in the wrong way, or it's not something they want to talk about. So like, you know, sometimes going to the deep places, but maybe you return there after you've talked about something that they want to talk about. And so it's, you know, it's like letting them be the guide to ask emotional and open-ended questions. I'm going to share some questions that are like maybe not as open as I would like, even in retrospect. It's so funny. It's like you always want to phrase your questions in the best way, but like they always just kind of come out how they come out. To rephrase questions if people don't understand what you're asking. And you'll see in an example I'm going to share, to let pauses and silences happen. That's like usually when the story like actually unfolds, is when you kind of get out of the equation and just like shut up and let the person talk. To try to get a beginning, middle, and end. So like often people will tell a story that's like incredibly powerful, but they like won't tell the beginning of it, or they won't give you like some kind of resolution, or they won't tell you how they change. So to ask like how someone's changed, or how they see it differently, to ask like an insane amount of follow-up questions, and everyone's different in terms of how they do interviews and things, but my approach is to like prepare, you know, dozens of questions, put them on a piece of paper, and like keep it in my backpack, basically. So like I'm super prepared. I have all the things I've been curious about that I've kind of thought out, but I'm not like looking at them. I'm looking at the person that I'm interviewing and kind of like trying to draw that out. So, you know, I guess I wanted to talk a little bit before we go to Q&A about just our stories kind of grown wild or sculpted. And so we've heard from, you know, people that are, you know, just powerful storytellers, but sometimes we want to edit something so that it's shareable, right? Like if we do, you know, if we tape an all-day rally, it's not necessarily like easy, we can't share that. Or if we do a 3-hour interview, it's like how do we put it in a container or way that we're able to share it? So, let's see how much time I have. Okay. I'll try to go quickly. So this is Marcia. We're doing a project called at St. John the Divine, where we are invited by a theater company to kind of share stories about the community. And as like a Jewish person who is of no faith like now, just like I'm not a religious person, but I was raised Jewish, I'm just like super curious, like why do all these people go to a cathedral? Why are they Episcopalian? What does that mean? Like I've been learning a lot. And just so they've been really open. So this is a woman named Marcia who actually also was raised Jewish, but she ended up at this cathedral. It's also just like a story for me about like why New Yorkers find community, and like why they find the places that they find that are, you know, sometimes religious spaces. So this came out, this short clip came out of like me asking Marcia like how she even started to connect to religion like as an adult.
My husband and I had rented a farmhouse on the coast of Maine, and it was a little on the bleak side, but there was so much nature around. It was so incredible. And there were a lot of herons, blue herons. And it was around sunset. I was sitting on a rock, the tide was out, and there were these herons all around me, and I didn't move. And I spent quite a while being very quiet and watching them and very moved by it. And then I turned around and started to walk back to the house, which is kind of up a little hill. And the sun had gone down, but it wasn't dark yet. I remember that. And I'm walking to the house. I'm neither happy nor unhappy. I'm a very neutral kind of feeling. And I was just suddenly overwhelmed with this presence. And the presence knew me. And I was so shocked, just shocked. And I just stood there for quite a long time and felt this positive energy, felt known, felt loved, felt connected. And at some point I went back into the house, and I didn't know what to do with it. The next night I repeated it, and it was still there. At that point I decided to read the Bible. It was very innocent. It was a very naive thing to do. I realize that now. What do I, so I just picked up the Bible that was in this house we were renting, and I started to read it, cover to cover, literally. And of course you get really bogged down when you get to Chronicles and Kings. is what I just kept reading. I mean, these are just like these pictures. It's like a slideshow. It doesn't make any rational sense at all. But it all suddenly connected all together. I mean, this is not rational. I cannot, no theologian will approve of this message, right? But I said, this is it. This is a way for me to connect to what happened on that hill. And I had this trust that this would be a way in. And I talked to friends at work. So they never had time to take me to church. They kept putting it off, and so I wandered into the cathedral. And they said to me afterwards, "Oh, that's not really a church. That's not really. It's too big. It's But I was so taken, and I kept going back to the cathedral. I was so moved by it, by the liturgy, by that whole sense of reverence and awe.
So that's just like a little anecdote, right, that Marcia shared about which may or may not be believable, right? It's like she felt this presence. So interestingly, that kind of came out as a whole story, right? But there were things that we edited out, right? So she started by saying it was in Maine, but then she says, my husband and I rented a farmhouse on the coast of Maine, so we don't need that twice. She said that the herons were eating clams, right? But she kind of rambles about clams, so we cut that out. And these are all subjective, right? Someone might be like, oh, that's awesome, I want to keep in the anecdote about clams or whatever, or the line. She said that behind the house there were a lot of pine trees. I didn't think that was that important. The wind was kind of moving. I was reflecting, I was like, why did I take that out? I don't know. Sometimes you take things out, right, when you're trying to for me, that little piece is about the feeling that she had. So we actually, in the performance project we're developing, we have the audience listen to that piece as they're walking through the nave, right? So it's the feeling that she had of the presence, for me, is reflected when the audience gets to walk through the nave and hear her story and kind of think about what it means to have a larger presence. So it was kind of cutting out things that were repetitive or that just felt like they were extra, right? That didn't get to the essential lines when she was talking emotionally about it. So she kind of talks about the Bible, and she kind of talks about her connection to Jesus, and we kind of pared it down a little bit. It doesn't mean that these are bad or things that shouldn't be in a story. It's just how do you essentialize something down into a short clip. So she talks about it becoming part of her life and her friends being Episcopal and Catholic and taking her to church. I didn't know if you needed to know what faith they were, just that they took her to church, right? So I just wanted to visualize, she pretty much told the whole story in full that we just pared down. So sometimes someone will tell a whole story and it's really you're just delivering the story they shared, right? And then sometimes a story will take, and she just kind of said the whole thing, there was no questions that drew that out. But then, so I wanted to share a short thing, and then we'll hear it spoken. It's just here's some raw tape, and because I'm hard to hear on the tape, I'm kind of you'll see my what I'm saying as text, so you can understand what I'm asking. They're not great worded questions, but you'll see.
I think that whatever we experience in our little lives somehow is reflection of something that's much bigger. I don't worry about anthropomorphizing God. And I had this argument with my sister. She says, you do that all the time. And I say, I don't think that's so bad. Because everything we are as human beings, where did that come from? It's part of the piece, it's all of a piece. Remember, God is one. So why would, I don't think he has a physical with a white beard, but I think the feelings of love and passion and all that, why wouldn't the creative force behind this have that? Where do we get it, So my thoughts about God are kind of mushy like that.
When you think about it, are you thinking about God as a creator?
Definitely. Creator, but a constant creator. I mean, the creation continues and continues. And I'm sure if the universe is expanding and will disappear, there must be other universes, because I can't believe it all just, I don't believe that. I believe it's forever. Constant creation. And
And have there been moments when you felt close again to God like you did when you were on that mountaintop?
Yep, there have. There have been moments during the institution. It's a part in the service when everything gets really quiet. You've been to our services, right? And there's that part where the priest he's doing his, saying all these words and all that. And I sometimes just feel the presence of God just come so close at moments like that, very much then. I had a very strange experience. It's all related to Eucharist. I hope this isn't going to bore you. But I remember when Pope John Paul comes to New York. Not my favorite person, but he's a good, fairly good pope, right? He had his moments. So he's in New York, and I go down. I was shopping, so I can't remember what year that would have been. I don't know. So I was shopping, and the lady in Lord and Taylor was telling me how she had seen him. He was at a racetrack or something. I don't know, he was saying mass here and there and everywhere, and how moved she was and how thrilled she was. And there was this sense in the air of something very special going on. And after I did all my shopping, I went to this little sandwich shop, and I went to have lunch. Now, this is a religious experience, I'm telling you. You can erase it all, but I walk into the sandwich shop, and this cop comes in, a real tall cop, and he looks at me, smiles at me, this beatific smile. I mean, it was like he was, I'm reading into it, but there was a moment, this man was just reading, smiling, and I sat down, I'm eating the sandwich, and I'm suddenly feeling this wonderful peace and love just pouring into me. I'm eating a tuna sandwich in a little diner because I was too hungry to get on the bus, thought I'd get sick. So when I was done, I got into a cab, and I'm feeling, wow, this is one of those moments, right? And just the cab driver had the radio on, and just at that moment, I'm at 41st Street, and the Pope is in Central Park celebrating Mass. They're distributing the bread, And I just felt this, I felt it because that's what was happening. And, that's one of those moments. So I get moments like that.
And is it a feeling like there's someone else, or what is the feeling?
The feeling is of just undescribable and irrational joy. Just I don't know what this is. I don't know why I feel this way, but I feel such joy. Just such joy. Everything is magical. Everything is wonderful at this moment. That's the feeling. So it's not always a hello, how are you, Marcia? This is God, which it would be really nice, but it's good enough, right? It's even probably better. Yeah.
Have you ever had the hi, Marcia, it's God?
Well, that's pretty much what that mountaintop thing was. I would say that was pretty close. That was pretty close to that.
When that happened, did you feel like you talked back, or did you?
Well, it was more like, holy shit, really? It was more like that. Oh my, is this really happening? Is this true? And there was this yes in the air. Yes, this is true. This is it. Hello.
So I want to end by asking an amazing volunteer to read the page that we've created, a short monologue. Are you okay?
Yeah.
I
I'm
can
just
also
going to
do
read
that.
the same thing she just said, right?
Well, it's a little edited.
A little bit.
A little bit. It's not quite, but it's, yeah. So.
Okay. I think that whatever we experience in our little lives somehow is a reflection of something that's much bigger. I don't worry about anthropomorphizing God. I mean, I have this argument with my sister. She says, you do that all the time. And I say, I don't think that's so bad. Because everything we are as human beings, where did that come from? It's part of the piece, remember? God is one. So I don't think he's physical with a white beard, but I think the feelings of love and passion and all that, why wouldn't the creative force be behind this have that? Where do we get it? My thoughts on God are kind of mushy like that. I sometimes just feel the presence of God just come so close. I remember when Pope John Paul came to New York, not my favorite person, but a fairly good pope, right? I mean, he had his moments. So he's in New York, and I was shopping, and the lady in Lord & Taylor was telling me how she had seen him at a racetrack or something, and he was saying mass here and there and everywhere, and how moved and thrilled she was. And there was this sense in the air of something very special going on. After I did all my shopping, I went to have lunch, and I walk into this little sandwich shop, and this cop comes in, real tall cop, and he looks at me. He smiles at me, this beatific smile. I mean, I'm reading into it, but there was this moment. This man was just really smiling. And I sat down, and I'm eating this sandwich, and I'm suddenly feeling this wonderful peace and love just pouring into me. I mean, I'm eating a tuna sandwich in a little diner because I was too hungry to get on the bus. I thought I'd get sick. So when I was done, I got into a cab, and I'm feeling, wow, this is one of those moments, right? And the cab driver had the radio on. And just at that moment, I'm at 41st Street, and the Pope is in Central Park celebrating Mass. They're distributing the bread, and I just felt this, like, I felt it because that's what was happening. The feeling is just indescribable and irrational joy. I just feel such joy, just such joy, like everything is magical, everything is wonderful at this moment. That's the feeling. So it's not always a, hello, how are you, Marcia? This is God. It was more like, holy shit, really? Is this really happening? Is this true? And there was this yes in the air, saying, yes, this is true. This is it. Hello.
So, I mean, it's very similar, right, to what she shared. We're not, like, this is her story, but there's something, like, both editing myself out, right, like in the, but also just, like, giving it a little bit the ability to hear in a different voice. And I guess I want to roll into the Q&A, but feel free to share any other reflections about that. It's an experiment to share this kind of like behind the curtain, so I hope it's not too much in the weeds for you. Yeah.
You know, in the beginning you asked what makes this a story after the first narrative, and also just contrasting what was read versus with the actual story right now. The big thing for me is what makes something a story is the felt experience, like the experiential skin feeling that you get that, you know, someone's relaying their lived experience. And it's very gratifying, and it resonates differently.
Did you feel it more in the audio or more in the monologue, more in the written?
Oh, the audio delivery is what like lands it in my body. Definitely,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah.
And to build off of what was just said, the idea of story being whether universal or individualistic, it was now Lisa's story, now that Lisa spoke it, and it goes to further sculpt, right, this idea that we are all one, and it may not be your specific story, but speak it, and now you have a part of it, right?
Totally, that was for me when you read it. It was like super powerful to just hear another voice reading her story. Yeah. Anything else? Or yeah.
I had like a question about one editing choice.
Yeah.
In the edited version, where at the end she says like, she talks about the feeling of like it being like God saying hi. But I feel like in the raw version, she says that was like a different experience, like a different kind of experience than the experience that she had in Manhattan. So like I would be cautious about like putting it almost seems like it's changing her meaning to put that adjacent. So like, can you tell more about that choice?
Well, it's like really funny because so we've been working on this since 2015, and like, you know, because it's a play, some pieces are recorded and some are performed. So we are kind of like in some ways adding text to people. So it's a different thing for us because normally we are just verbatim. But so like, I think it's like when I looked at the transcript, I like missed my question. So it was really interesting exercise to prepare this for you all because I listened to my question and I realized that the same thing that you just mentioned for the first time, that like she's actually talking about the mountaintop.
She's talking about a whole different time.
She's talking about a whole different time. And then I thought about it and I said, and in my head I'm like, but to me it was kind of part of the same like dialogue. So like I don't know how I feel about it. Like I feel like it's still true to like the way that she has these experiences with the divine. But like yeah, like it's not an exact verbatim. But like I guess with this piece we're adding our own text. We're like, you know, we're sometimes combining voices, so it's like a little bit different. But yeah. But I like literally noticed that today for the first time.
Yeah.
Because I don't normally look at my questions in the transcript, I just look at the text. So sometimes you miss something like that. Yeah.
I was just gonna ask if maybe you could talk with Martha, is it Martha? And see like what they think about that cut and if it aligns with their meaning.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I have another question. You know, I think so often, like, the challenge of doing this kind of editing work is, like, making those decisions, right? And it's often really hard because when we are interviewing people, it's like, it's a conversation and we're in dialogue with another human being, and then often the editing process is, like, someone alone with their laptop, but you work in collaboration with a partner.
Yeah, so
can you just talk more about that collaboration and how that affects the way that you go through the process of making these decisions about how to tell a person's story, and if it makes it harder or easier, or?
So I think it's been interesting. So I have a collaborator, Michael, who is co-directing this piece with me, who I've worked with for like 12 years, and also we brought in another director, and so she's been shaping the pieces with us. We've kind of been writing and like shaping and doing the interviews and things like that. But part of the interesting thing with the theater project is how to make it resonate maybe like even beyond. And so it's our first project actually that like won't be entirely verbatim, or, you know, we just have really powerful stories. Like one of the congregants, like the entire interview I wanted to put into the play. Like a lot of so Marcia like doesn't have this experience, but a lot of the congregants like, you know, came from really stifling religious experiences, particularly like the LGBT community. And so they just have incredibly powerful stories about the challenges they faced as youth, and then why they feel at home in the cathedral. And so, yeah, like I wanted to put his whole story in, you know, so right now it's like a 4-page monologue that's been like condensed, but it's hard to figure out how to share. But I think what's been powerful for me in terms of the collaboration is that I think it's been, the more voices we have actually, like we had an intern working on the project this last like semester. And so the goal was to actually have a bunch of voices talk about what resonated with them, and then like what would go in. And then we actually bring in actors, which is just a different thing, right? So instead of editing in a computer by ourselves, we have an actor who's then maybe adding something or talking about what resonates with them and adding their own like voice to it. So I've like loved that process because I think we've been exploring together what does faith mean, like also to us. And so it's about reflecting the community voices and trying to be authentic to them, but also like as artists, what does it mean to be in this space and to think about this idea and think about like, you know, what brings people to community, because I think it's something that resonates with all the collaborators on the project.
I love the slides where you showed what you deleted, your editing choices.
That wasn't too geeky.
No, I thought it was wonderful, and in terms of like a participatory project, it gives me a lot of ideas because we are using verbatim text from interviews, but in zines, so they're almost like little poems. And for people to see like their 40-page transcript reduced to like a 12-page zine, or a section of it, I think you can use that to increase the participatory nature of it. Like, what do you think if we take out these lines? And what do you think if we take out these? Like, to be able to see that is really helpful.
Totally. Well, and just even me reflecting on it, I was like, why did I take that line out? You know, it's just like, it's I don't know, it's a process, right, that may never end because there's not like a perfect edit. It's just what you think collaboratively you want to share collectively just as a story.
Do you share with your interview subjects? Would you give them the transcript and say these are the edits we're making and how do you feel about that? And
so it's more like a conversation about what's been created and if it feels right. Yeah. I mean, it's not like that. Lots of people do that as a process, but we haven't done it as like the collaborative process. we've more done it as like sharing the story and seeing like, does this fit? So workshopping it, maybe like in a rough cut stage, and then maybe we add more or less, but like not like an in-depth. Yeah. Is there, and yeah, any general questions, or if not, that's okay.
I'm wondering, I am a history student. I work on a topic that happened several decades ago. Do you ever interview descendants? And if so, are the parameters just the same? You know, same rules, let the pauses breathe and ask open-ended questions, or is that kind of you know, it's too far from the real thing? Is that something you ever do?
I don't understand. Sorry.
Like interview the children and grandchildren of the story.
Of the people, and
Yeah.
and like saying, I think that, I mean, those for me are the best practices of like just how to approach all things and all interviews with people. But it's a good question. I mean, we do a lot of like multi-generational. So I'm not sure if I'm quite answering, but like our film Water Warriors has a son in it and a mother, and so we were like, both of their stories are part of the larger community story, and that's a really interesting piece because like her son was 12 when the kind of like inciting action happened, when they were doing all this activism to stop this fracking company from coming in. And so she reflects on how she felt as a 12-year-old for him to be involved. Like later, we interviewed him when he was about 16 as part of the finished film to like tell his story, reflecting on when he was 12. So like that was a very cool experience to feel like we had multiple voices from the same family talking, and like they're talking about their experiences with each other. So I don't know if that hits on what you're asking. But yeah, that's been very cool. It's kind of, it's not always the circumstance, like, but I think increasingly with the film projects, where often we're engaging an entire family, we'll often have like the kid, you know, so I was filming a family that was being displaced post-Sandy, and, you know, they had a 5-year-old daughter, so also trying to get her voice, like as much as she wanted to share, as well as her parents talking about her, to try to kind of like represent the family as a whole. It's been interesting.
How do you arrive at the stories that you want to tell?
I mean, like, it's just about time. So I think, like, how many stories can I tell in the time that is allotted in a day? So it's just like, I mean, I have like 10 projects that I want to do, that I have like ideas about, like people I've met that I think are really interesting. We've been trying to continue to tell stories about Hurricane Sandy, but it's hard to sometimes like fund that project because people are like, oh, it's in the past, it doesn't matter, but it's like still really relevant for people. And so trying to like continue projects that I think are really important. But I have like a bunch of projects that I just like, it's just like, how much time can I allot to each of them? I think the ideas for them come from mostly the people that we've met and the organizations that are like just amazing that I've been able to kind of like encounter through just trying to be active citizens. And so there's like, you know, one of the things we do is we do a series on young environmentalists for Earth Island Institute. We've made a series of 30 films on 30 different young people over the years, and there's like many of them that I've wanted to do like an individual documentary about because they're like groundbreaking, like really young people that just have all the like hope in the world, and I feel like have so much to share for, you know, how we should think about the environment. So I've wanted to do lots of projects on them. All kinds of things, yeah.
What was the first story that you wanted to try to like capture in this format?
So the first project was a project around incarceration. And so I felt like I wanted to do a project that was in upstate New York, that I wanted to help share the voices of people that had spent long amounts of their life in prison or their family members, and to just hear from them about how incarceration had impacted their experience of time. And it kind of hits on, like, I think that, you know, for me it's about how stories also are important because I think they shape how, you know, it's like how people, what they think about the world and their own philosophies, and I feel like stories are kind of like underpin all that. And that's like something that just fascinates me, is just the way people approach the world, and how does that affect how they act and move throughout the world. So for me, that project was like instrumental in kind of having that focus. Yeah.
I had wanted to ask a question about Water Warriors, and since you brought it up, I will. I just watched it recently and thought it was so powerful and fantastic. I've been recommending it to everyone. But since also we've been talking about the choices and the challenge of paring down even one person's story, when I watched that, one of the things that I really admire is that you were able to make it a short film. So I wondered if you could talk about, with this more complex story that involves multiple people, how did you make the choice to keep it at the shorter length of 22 minutes?
So the reason for that was really like totally utilitarian, was to make it the best tool it could be for organizing. And so often, and I mean, I'm not like opposed to making feature films, but it's hard to make a project that then people can watch at an organizing meeting and then talk about for another 2 hours. So for us, like we had enough material to maybe make a feature film, but part of the idea was to create something short that would tell the story collectively, and that would be able to be like the most useful for people that were trying to organize around natural resources. So yeah, that was
Can you talk a little bit more about, you've done like a participatory web documentary, I think the trailer you showed was for like an interactive.
Yeah.
So like what does that look like, and how does that shape the way that, because then my understanding is that you'd be like giving over some control of shaping the story to the viewer or the listener. What does that look like?
Yeah, so I didn't share a ton from that, but the Sandy Storyland project was a project that invited anyone impacted by the storm to share like a story through, like we had a phone line people could call in, we had a website where people could write in narratives. So that was like a whole like for me, that was like, giving over all the control, right, of like editing. The most we would do is like, fix people's caps if they like, had like all caps or something when they put in their submission, or something that would make it hard to read. But we just like, it was like we had different rules about just like maintaining all the text and not kind of impacting. As long as it was a story and it was personal about, someone's self or someone they had permission to share a story, then it was like game to be on the platform. So that was like, so yeah, I'd say like, I guess I'm sharing projects here that are more like, we're editing or we're kind of shaping, but there's definitely, things that we've done that are more open-ended. We had open meetings for volunteers to come and like help shape the project. We did like education programming that totally shaped the project that was like run by volunteers. So that was, feel free to check it out, it's on sandystoryline.com, but that was like a very open-ended project that was meant to be collaborative. So that just knowing that like, we weren't experts and there were so many people impacted. It's funny because now the project that we're sort of developing is more standard. Like we've been doing more formal oral history interviews and kind of like going back to like trying to make something that like is more shaped, or is more kind of creative or artistic. But it's kind of just like an accompaniment to like the listening process that started with Sandy's Storyline. So we felt like we spent many years listening and then wanted to like make something from all that listening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this tonight. It's a really rare and special thing to get to like see behind the scenes of how stories get made, and so I really appreciate you being willing to do that. Thank you all again for coming out, and hopefully I'll see some of you back for future events in the series.
Thank you for listening.